Hello, my name is Justin Kennedy,
My name is Max Judah.
and today our duet speech is going to be a presentation on why not to be a viewer of the World Cup 2022 in Qatar. With the United States' run in the FIFA World Cup coming to a close last Saturday, U.S. citizens turned their attention away from Qatar and back onto their everyday lives. However, without any patriotic stake in the World Cup, we should keep our eyes on the injustices surrounding the World Cup in Qatar. From the country's general mistreatment of women and the LGBTQ community to the lives lost in the construction phases, we should instead look at what is being done behind the scenes and avoid making ourselves a viewer of the World Cup in Qatar.
The World Cup is perhaps one of the biggest global sporting events which has the world's attention once every 4 years. This World Cup, however, is much different than the one which has come before it. Today, in this speech, we will be speaking about the negatives of which this World Cup has had and on the world and why it should be boycotted by the people around the world. First of all, we will be speaking about the impact of which the World Cup has had on the refugees and the people who have built these World Cup stadiums and the other stuff which they have had to build in order for this World Cup to become a thing. Secondly, we will move on to the huge human rights issue which is surrounded in Qatar. And finally, we will be speaking about the bribing which took place in order for this event to even be facilitated. Moving on to our first point of workers dying. The lives of innocent migrant workers were lost and hidden in the construction of the World Cup ever since Qatar won the right to host. There has been 6,500 deaths in the last 10 years. The people who died in these constructions come from a mix of countries, mainly on the eastern side of the world, and they have come from India, Nepal, and a few from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and also in Sri Lanka. These lives were not only just used for the construction of the stadiums, but they were also used and lost in the construction of a new airport, new roads, public transport systems, hotels, and other amenities for people to enjoy the Qatari World Cup.
Secondly, are general Qatari human rights issues. Qatar, being a very Muslim country, is very strong set in its religious beliefs. This includes its views on women and the LGBTQ community. Old Qatari law is very strict in their guardianship rules over women, essentially making them property like a piece of livestock. Many key pieces to their lives are put in the hands of the men in their lives. That could be their fathers, uncles, or brothers at very younger ages, and eventually will be given to their husbands later in life. Women need their guardian's permission for simple and independent tasks such as to marry, to study abroad on government scholarships, work in many government jobs, travel abroad until certain ages, and receive some forms of reproductive health care. Women who are able to their voice for husbands are not seen as fit to be their children's guardian either, so therefore they must be with the man in order to see their child and be an impact on their lives. In regards to the LGBTQ community, sodomy or same-sex sensual contact is an offense in the Qatar under the Penal Code, which is punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Qatari prisons are also very harsh to members of the LGBTQ community because it's religiously shamed even in prison. However, local officials go much beyond the scope of upholding their penal codes in trying to track down people who engage in sodomy. And it almost crosses the line into abuse and harassment. An article by the Human Rights Watch documented 6 cases of severe and repeated beatings and 5 cases of sexual harassment in police custody between 2019 and 2022. Security forces arrested people in public places based solely on their gender expression and unlawfully searched their phones. As a requirement for their release, security forces mandated that transgender women detainees attend conversion therapy sessions at a government-sponsored behavioral health care center.
Moving on to the third point of our speech, we will be talking about the bribing of the FIFA officials which took place in order for Qatar to land the rights to host this 2022 World Cup. The legitimacy of their election to host the World Cup is even questionable. There have been multiple instances and pieces of evidence which have been brought forward recently of Qatari officials bribing the FIFA hosting selection committee. There is specifically the African FIFA officials, and especially South African officials. A key Qatari official, Hassan Al-Tuwadi, who is now the Secretary General of Selection Committee, is the main character in question. There is a 4-part show called FIFA Uncovered that explained that Al Tawadi allegedly offered a $1.5 million bribe to free voters from Africa. Isai Hayatu of Cameroon, Jacques Enuma from Ivory Coast, and Amos Adamu of Nigeria. There has been a whistleblower called Federa Al-Jamid that has claimed for more than a decade she was in the room with Al Tawadi at a hotel in Angola in January 2010 when the money was offered to free men who are among 24 voters set to pick the 2018 and 2022 World Cup hosts later that year. The prices were laughed at, however, and they were upped to $2.3 million in exchange for Qatar people to vote for Qatar come the selection day.
Why we chose this topic, or what is our stake in this? As a country that stands on justice for all its people, in spite of race, religion, sexuality, or gender, we should not be supporting the World Cup being hosted in Qatar. We should be fighting human rights violations like what happens daily in Qatar, instead of giving them viewership and funding them financially through our viewership and attending of the sport.
Today we have spoken to you about the issues which have come from the World Cup being hosted in 2022. There have been many issues which have recently been upcoming. There have been people that have been beat outside of stadiums. There's people being kicked out of stadiums due to what they're wearing. I remember I was watching one game and a person had an armband it was called One Love. And basically what happened is some of these teams from the western side of the world, their teams actually wanted to wear these armbands to showcase one love and that everyone is equal and that there shouldn't be any prejudices against people's sexuality. And these people are actually being escorted out of the stadiums by the Qatari security and just kind of thrown away just because they're voicing their own opinions. So we personally think that this World Cup in 2022 should not take place, and Qatar shouldn't really be making any sort of profit or revenue as a result of this for not being open and their views on society alongside with the goals of the World Cup and making sure that everyone is equal and everyone is welcome.
And here is our source page. That is the end of our duet speech. Thank you so much for listening. And if we did not convince you not to be a viewer of the World Cup, we hope that we at least brought to your attention some of the issues behind what goes on behind the scenes and what you're seeing on TV, and letting you make an educated decision on your own about whether or not you want to be a viewer. It's been a pleasure talking to you for this entire class, and we hope that you enjoyed our final speech. Again, this is Justin Kennedy.
And Max Shooter. And as Justin said, thank you so much for everything throughout this class and the discussion posts that you guys have posted. And I feel like me and Justin both have really learned a lot about different people's views, and we've learned different techniques which we hope we've implemented during this presentation.
Thank you so much, and you all have a nice day. Take care.